The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me this episode is co-host Will Miles. You can find him at his site, readandreaction.com, and on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. Well, we missed you last week. Real job got in the way out on the West Coast and living it up in LA, I saw.
Well, we had one night where we got to go out to the Staples Center and watch the Lakers, but unfortunately LeBron wasn't out there playing. He was just stalking around, getting ready for Anthony Davis to come out there. So it was a interesting game to see Lance Stevenson and Rajon Rondo out there playing for the Lakers. But yeah, we were pretty busy out there and had one night to blow off some steam. It was a good time, and certainly missed being on the podcast, and happy to be back.
Well, the Gators had some coaches leaving, got some coaches coming while you were gone. A lot to keep up with. We'll get into that, but just when you think you can have a staff that might stick around for some continuity, no surprise in the SEC, these coaches jumping ship.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the surprise has been that, guys like Charlton Warren went to a school like Georgia. Obviously he's getting paid to go to Georgia, I'm sure, quite handsomely. But usually you don't see guys jump interconference quite as much.
They're paying that man $600,000. What?
Hey, we'll see if he's worth it. If Kyrie Elam goes there, maybe he is. But I think that when you start paying. When you start paying DB coaches $600,000, that things are a little bit out of whack in terms of priorities. So, hey, we'll see. I mean, 2 years ago, if they'd have had a defensive backs coach who could coach the appropriate defense for second and 23, I think they would have won a title. So maybe they're hoping that he'll bring the right juice there to Georgia. But no, I mean, you're always going to have coaches moving around. In fact, you want coaches to be getting promoted. Mm-hmm. So, if a coach goes from a defensive backs coach to a defensive coordinator or something like that, that's a good thing for your program. It's a healthy thing for your program. And I do think that having turnover at those sort of position coaches is a good thing as well. Get guys different voices and sort of different ideas. And as long as Mullen can keep the continuity at the top with him and Grantham, and can make sure that the players are being taught from the top down, and that the assistant coaches are teaching the things that Grantham needs for his defense, I think it'll be fine regardless of who you put in there, so long as they're holding their guys accountable.
All right, so coming up this episode, we'll talk the hire of David Turner for the defensive line. We'll get Will's thought on Torian Gray as well, since Will wasn't able to join us last week. But before we do that, remember, you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes there, as well as articles from the News4Jax sports team. Also catch Gators Breakdown, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Spotify. A lot of you catch it out there, but if your friends listen, you can get them to listen on all those platforms. And heck, when using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So here we go. David Turner has been hired as the defensive line coach to take over for the departed Sal Sunseri. And on Sunday, Mullen announced the addition of Turner as a Gators defensive line coach. And Turner, who has 33 years of coaching experience, worked for Mullen for 4 seasons in Mullen's first season at Mississippi State in 2009, and then as well as 3 more additional years there. So Dan Mullen did have to say, David is a great addition to our coaching staff and the Gators football family. We spent some time together at Mississippi State. He has produced numerous first-round picks in the NFL over his 30-plus years of coaching. Having spent 16 years in the SEC, he understands that this is a line of scrimmage league, and our defensive line will continue to play fast, physical, and aggressive under his leadership. So, Will, before I get into his background of where he's been and who he's coached, one thing that I won't forget excuse me, you may not have it readily available, but you have mentioned time and time again how important it is. And we know it on the surface to be a strong team on the defensive line. And they bring in a guy who has plenty of experience. We know Todd Grantham has an aggressive front. I'd be interested to see how Turner fits into that mold and the type of players he can bring into the trenches of the SEC.
Yeah, I think the first thing for Turner, at least the feather in his cap for me, is that Mullen had experience with him for a year. He went off to Kentucky for a couple of years, and then Mullen decided to bring him back. A lot of times you see a guy who will leave after a year when a new coaching administration takes hold. And, if he were to hire somebody with only that experience, you'd have to wonder, okay, well, why did he leave after a year? But the fact that Mullen brought him back makes me feel pretty confident that Mullen saw something in him, brought him back to Mississippi State. Then he was there for 3 years, from 13 to 15 under Jeff Collins and Manny Diaz as well. So certainly the type of attacking defense that Grantham's going to play, Turner has some experience with that, coaching the defensive line, and has a hand in bringing in some of those guys who were on Mississippi State's defensive line this year, who we looked at and said, wow, that's a really good defensive line. I think that proved out this year. And as far as recruiting those guys, I mean, the guys like Jeffrey Simmons, the guys like Montez Sweat, those guys came in under Turner, or at least came in with him as involved in the recruiting process. So I think it's a positive hire. I don't think that you can really. It's hard to look at a position coach and say, hey, this guy's a difference maker. But I think we can certainly say that Mullen has comfort with him. I think we can say that he's recruited top tier guys to lower level programs. And now he's got the sort of gleam of the Florida program, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do, bringing in guys in the defensive line. And quite honestly, we're going to get to find out pretty quick, because we've got Pickering up at Mississippi State that he's got a relationship with, and some other guys that we'll talk about that potentially Florida could bring in on the defensive line, and that's an area of need heading into signing day.
Yep, and we'll get some more thoughts about him. But first, some little points from the bio from the University of Florida that they sent out. So after spending last season, the 2018 season, at University of Texas San Antonio, Turner spent the previous 16 years in the SEC at Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Alabama, and Vanderbilt. During his coaching career, Turner has mentored several NFL players, including 2017 overall #1 NFL draft selection Myles Garrett, then Fletcher Cox, Josh Boyd, Javon Hay, Kyle Love, Pernell McPhee, Preston Smith. So, and most recently, of course, just mentioned that 2018 at UTSA helped coordinate a defense that totaled 78 tackles for loss for 250 yards. That was good for 48th in the nation. 23 sacks for 140 yards. That was good for 84th in the nation. But before that was at Texas A&M 2016, 2017. Where he coached defensive tackles and also defensive run game coordinator. He basically coached along the whole defensive line, helped guided Myles Garrett to become the #1 pick. So Garrett, under the direction of Turner, became the 9th player in school history to earn unanimous first-team All-American honors in 2016. He was also a finalist for the Bednarik and Rotary Lombardi Awards, led the Aggies with 8.5 quarterback sacks, 15 tackles for loss in 2016. Also contributed to 2 forced fumbles and 10 quarterback hurries during his final season there at Texas A&M. So during his stint at A&M, Turner, his old boss, John Chavis, a lot of people know that name there, raved about Turner's abilities and, quote, he's a great technician, takes pride in his work, as all of our coaches do. I think that's the thing that sets him apart. You look at his career, wherever he's been, his players that have played as well. So he's also considered as a keen recruiter, and that was the prerequisite to be on Frank Wilson's staff. From a lot of the articles I went back and looked at the hire when it was made, for coming from Texas A&M to UTSA. Go back to Mississippi State 2013 through 2015. Fronts at Mississippi State earned a reputation for being consistently disruptive and putting pressure on the opposing quarterback. Over his final 2 seasons in Starkville, the Bulldogs piled up over 180 tackles for loss, including 68 quarterback sacks. In 2015, the Bulldogs set a school record with 98 tackles for loss, while 2014 unit produced 37 sacks, which ranked #2 in the SEC and were 3rd most in school history. So, Will, before I go even further, that was right around the time Jeff Collins had been hired by Jim McElwain. His 2014 season would have been Jeff Collins' last season at Mississippi State. Turner was there, and I'll go back to that stat there. In 2014, produced 37 sacks, which ranked #2 in the SEC, and were the 3rd most in school history at Mississippi State. Some more numbers there that helped Mississippi State to its first 10-win season there. Produced 2nd most sacks It was 37 in the SEC, as I said, the nation's #1 red zone defense. Our opponent scored 63.64% of their chances in the red zone. So a lot of familiarity there with the way Jeff Collins ran things. Mullen brought along Todd Grantham, kind of similar attacking style defense. Mullen knows Turner. Mullen knew Collins. Mullen knows Grantham. It just kind of seems to be a pretty good scheme fit when you look at everything and piece it together from the days at Mississippi State.
Yeah, well, that's been something Mullen's done since day one. I mean, he brought over Gonzalez and he brought over Hevesy on the offensive side. He brought over Grantham on the defensive side, and so this is sort of adding to that, bringing in a guy to coach the defensive line. And when you look at where Florida has struggled, or I mean, so you look at Polite and you look at Zuniga, they played very, very well. But some of the guys like Antonius Clayton, Elijah Conliffe, Tadaro Slayton, those are guys that we haven't necessarily heard their names quite as much as we might have expected based on their recruiting pedigree. And so you wonder whether the tactician part of that you were talking about there in some of those quotes really is something that Mullen's looking for, that he's looking for somebody who's going to hold his players accountable, make sure they're consistent, and really develop the guys on the defensive line, because they're going to need to. Just because of the depth there and the numbers. So, it's going to be interesting to see. I think if we see giant strides made at defensive tackle, then that's maybe something that we can attribute to this hire. And I think if we see regression at defensive tackle, then maybe that's something that we can attribute to the hire as well. I mean, the reality is that a lot of times the defensive coordinator dictates what you do as a defensive line coach. Whether it's a one-gap scheme or a two-gap scheme up front determines how you coach it, whether it's something that you're reading and then reacting, or whether you just shoot a gap. All those things make a difference. So the good news is that in Collins' defense and Diaz's defenses and Chavis's defenses and now Grantham's defenses, the defensive linemen are asked to do very similar things. And so not necessarily identical, but they're asked to do similar things. And so Turner has experience coaching in these types of defenses. And I think certainly the familiarity with Mullen has been a theme throughout the last year at Florida, and certainly worked out well in 2018. And so I think we need to need to defer to him when it comes to making that choice. I mean, he knows who he's getting because he's had him before, and I'm sure that factors into it. And then the 16 years in the SEC that he has means he has relationship with high school coaches. Means he's got all those relationships to be able to walk in. I mean, if you were to ask, okay, we've got an open slot, who are we going to hire? Who's the best coach? I mean, he clicks a lot of the boxes. SEC experience. Experience with defenses similar to Grantham, 3-4s, experience with attacking defensive linemen who've made it to the NFL and who have excelled under him, recruiting guys who turned into elite guys on the defensive line. Really, the only thing that maybe I would like to see is for Mullen to bring in a guy who's got elite ties in Georgia so that they can make some inroads maybe against the Bulldogs. But at the end of the day, he checks all the boxes, and we'll see how things go as we move forward. Like I said, I think turnover at the staff positions is a healthy thing. Different voice in there may actually make a difference, and Turner certainly has a voice where Mullen knows what he's going to say, and I think that familiarity has proven to be a good thing for Mullen thus far.
Yeah, I think I'm ready to see what he could do, I guess, with the defensive tackles more than anything, because that was probably a group. As the season went on, they found some guys who could end up making plays, but we went into the season with Conliffe and Slayton expecting to be those guys, and they never really lived up to the billing. So maybe, Todd Grantham, wherever he's been able to find the outside rush. He's been able to find the defensive end. So maybe with Turner along, I think hopefully the middle of that defensive line gets along stronger. Let's finish a little bit of his bio. I won't go through all of it, but we'll continue with that 2014 season there. So under Turner's tutelage, senior Preston Smith had a career year in 2014, racking up a team best 9 tackles and 15 tackles for loss. In his first season back at Mississippi State back in 2013, Turner helped lead one of the best defenses in the SEC, ranking them on the SEC's top 5 in total defense, 4th with 349.3 yards per game. And rushing defense was 4th as well with 144.2 yards per game. So during the last 3 games of that season, Mississippi State allowed just 11.3 points per game, including 2 contests that featured overtime games. So before that, of course, Kentucky, Mississippi State as well from 2007 to 2009, Mullen's first year there. So we'll get my thoughts kind of here with it. And you've hit on some of it there. There were some mixed reviews. Thoughts on the hire from the fan base. And don't get me wrong, it was an overwhelming name out there to begin with. I do get that part of it. I do think there was some expectations when replacement lists started coming out, and the hot names were Chris Wilson, Kevin Patrick, Charlie Partridge. Those guys were never offered the job, from my understanding. Asking around, Turner was Mullen's main target. One reason I'll say trust Mullen on this hire is, this sounds like a hire, as you said, Mullen would have made last year, as in getting the guys he's familiar with. Now, I'm not sure why he wasn't hired last year instead of Sunseri, but this speaks to the familiarity and the consistency that really helped this staff make a really fast turnaround on the field in getting 10 wins this past season. So recruiting was the worry there in bringing in so many guys from Mississippi State, not so much the coaching, but it looks like both aspects right now are working themselves out. The defensive line, as I just mentioned, would be a Turner and Grantham project. Turner has a solid resume. I think too much is being made from the 1 year at UT San Antonio. People, we had to go get a coach from UT San Antonio. Well, they've actually had a string of defensive line coaches go to the NFL and now Florida. Jimbo Fisher came in to Texas A&M, cleaned house to get his guys in, much like Dan Mullen did when he came in here at Florida. So, and Turner and just ended up finding himself at UT San Antonio. So it's pretty obvious Dan Mullen likes him, kept him around when he was hired at Mississippi State, brought him back for another stint, but went and got paid by the Aggies, and now Mullen's bringing him back again. So this shows just how much Mullen likes him, how he has impressed Mullen enough to bring him to Florida when things are starting to go so well at Florida, and bring in someone with a lot of SEC experience, someone that can come in, hit the ground running. And one more quote. I went and reached out to Mississippi State alum, quarterback alum, and radio personality Matt Wyatt. He's been on with us before to discuss Mullen in the past. And he said, quote, "I think this is an excellent hire given their history together. Coach Turner is old school, tough kind of guy. When he walks in, everybody sits up straight."
Yeah, I think you opened up the podcast tonight talking about continuity, and pretty much everywhere Turner's been, he stayed 3 or 4 years. And so if Mullen's goal is to build continuity, he certainly got it with Hevesy, he certainly got it with Gonzalez. And at a school like Florida, where the resources are really pretty unlimited when it comes to coaching salaries, you wouldn't expect him to have to jump to a place like Texas A&M to get more money. You figure that he's going to get what he needs there at Florida, and that the only way he leaves is if he gets a promotion to a better position someplace else. And so if the goal is to build continuity, if the goal is to build familiarity with the players and have sort of a consistent voice and a consistent face, facing all those high schools where he's going to recruit and talking to the same guys year after year after year. I mean, that's one of the things you see with a lot of different guys where if the offense is constantly changing, Muschamps teams are a great example of this. The quarterback never had the same offensive coordinator 2 years in a row just because of the way those guys were getting cycled through. And so that kind of thing holds true on the defensive side as well. I'm sure that the defensive lineman eventually having a consistent voice is a good thing. And, I said earlier, sometimes a different voice is good, but sometimes something continuous is good as well, that you can continue to get better, you can continue to build trust, and you don't have to start over every year. So I think there's something to be said for that. I think somebody who's been coaching for 16 years in the SEC and been coaching for as long as Turner has isn't necessarily going to be looking for that next job a year from now. Probably doesn't have eyes on being a head coach at the college level. Probably figures he's going to be a career assistant. And so, I don't necessarily think he's going to be looking for a grass is greener type situation, and maybe that's what Mullen's looking for too. So, at the end of the day, it's a solid hire. It's not flashy, but it's a defensive line coach. It's not a defensive coordinator. If it was a defensive coordinator, you'd say, okay, I want flashy. When it's a defensive line coach, I think you want somebody solid who's going to hold everybody accountable up front, and we'll certainly see whether he can do that.
Well, our good friend Thomas Goldcamp from Swamp 24/7 tweeted out his article there, and it was a free article there on Swamp 24/7, and he points out that the additions of Turner and Gray to the staff, there is now, there is now 100 combined years of SEC experience on this staff right now. So his first staff had assistant coaches last year who combined for 78 years as full-fledged on-field coaches. in the SEC. But right now, with the two newest hires, now we know Gray only had the 1 year at Florida. So basically, with Turner and his resume here, I mean, the Gators have one combined 100 years of SEC experience.
Yes, no excuses, right? No excuses for the players not to get better, for the players not to develop, and quite honestly, no excuses for the coaches to not be able to go out and recruit at a high level as well at a school like Florida. And that's certainly something we're going to see this cycle and the cycles moving forward as well. It strikes me that Gray, and I think particularly Gray, probably really helps on a recruiting perspective, to be able to point towards guys like Tabor and Quincy Wilson and their development under him, to point towards just sort of the DBU moniker and bringing those guys in, recruiting at that level. Again, it's only 1 year, but some of the guys who came in who are still at Florida know him and know of him and probably are thrilled to have him back in some capacity, especially considering the way in which Warren left the program. So, I think anytime, I mean, this was something we said last year when Mullen assembled a class, was that it was an impressive number of SEC years that whole staff had together. And I think it still holds true now. But at the end of the day, the experience only helps you if you use it, and if you can use it to execute both on the field and on the recruiting trail. And that's something we're going to see coming up in February, and certainly something that we'll see in August. And it's depressing that it's not until August that we get to see this sort of stuff. But I'm looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing with the whole SEC experience, and you put it best, I mean, nothing is going to surprise these guys. I don't think they're surprised with how good Georgia's doing. They're definitely not surprised at how good Alabama is. They're not good. They're not surprised at how well LSU can recruit and the talent that they can get. They're not going to be surprised at Auburn and what they do. Maybe a little more surprised about Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher. But these guys have been around the block long enough to know who these coaches are. A lot of these coaches in the SEC have been around the SEC. Jimbo Fisher, yeah, he was at FSU for some years, but grew up in the Saban tree, recruited in the South at FSU. Kirby Smart and his staff has a lot of SEC experience. Pruitt and his staff has a lot of SEC experience. So Mullen and Mullen was kind of the outsider, before coming in with Meyer. Before those guys had no SEC experience coming in. Of course, Charlie Strong stuck around and I think really helped along in that transition. But Meyer, a lot of the offensive guys that he brought had no SEC experience. So, Mullen since then has feet planted in the SEC. A lot of these assistants, Gonzalez and Hevesy, feet planted in the SEC. It really started back then when Meyer brought these guys in, and they haven't been out of it since.
Yeah, though, Meyer didn't need a whole lot of SEC experience to win when he was at Florida. So, I don't necessarily think that SEC experience is a prerequisite for winning. I think that SEC experience puts you to a place where there shouldn't be any excuses or any surprises. And so, at the end of the day, though, it's still going to be about getting the players out there, getting the right players in the right position and putting them in a position to succeed. And Mullen showed last year that he's quite capable of doing that, even with guys he hasn't recruited. But at this point now, he's going to have guys that he has recruited coming in, and he's going to have his staff that's handpicked to do it. And he can't say that he didn't know something was going to, he can't say that the defensive line coach is responsible for missteps along the way. I mean, he knows this guy, right? He's had him on the staff, and so at the end of the day, I think he knows what he's getting into. I think he knows what he's looking for in that hire. And I think, again, I think that as long as it's top down, where Mullen is dictating Grantham what he wants in the defense, and then Grantham is dictating to his coaches what he wants coached, I think everything will be fine.
All right. Well, I was peeking at the YouTube chat while we were doing this, and we're talking coaches, and they're already clearly talking our next topic. So we know the world of recruiting never stops. It is you and I have talked behind the scenes. It still blows our mind how popular it is with articles in your site at Read and Reaction and the episodes that we do here. Recruiting never stops. Recruiting, and that it just keeps spinning and ever so popular. So we'll, little update here for recruiting. A lot of, 4 main guys here left that the Gators are pretty much going after now, with about a week and a half left before National Signing Day. So here we go. We'll start at the top with the biggest target, Kyer Elam, Colorado visit over the weekend. Dan Mullen and Torian Gray will be visiting him on this Monday, going to his basketball game. So hopefully, and I don't think we'll know even if it does, but hopefully to wrap this one up. And he posted some pictures on social media that Kyrie Elam did of working out with Brandon Flowers, who, Kyrie Elam's dad is familiar with, and was also coached by Torian Gray at Virginia Tech. So, Will, it's clearly a Florida-Georgia battle. I don't think the coaching changes, I've said it last week, were made for Kyrie Elam. It would be just a nice added bonus. I don't think you ever hire somebody just for one particular recruit, but that is how important he is. I think there is, there is a connection into when how fast hires were made, maybe when they were announced by Georgia, of how just important and I've always said, and I'll stick to this. It is Kyrie Elam, this being a Florida-Georgia battle, it is a perception recruit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, beyond just going one-on-one versus Kirby is, if you look at where Georgia has really struggled the past couple of years, it's been in the defensive backfield. I mean, I already sort of took a swipe at the second and 23, but it's not as if Jalen Hurts ran down the field this past year against Georgia. He threw him down the field. And, bringing in guys who are, everybody got really excited about Chris Steele, and rightly so. He was the 41st ranked player nationally. Well, Kyrie Elam's the 48th ranked player nationally. And Florida has some built-in advantages in that, Matt Elam played at Florida, and that, he's very familiar with the Gators, familiar with the program, probably even familiar with Mullen in some capacity. And so with those built-in advantages, Florida needs to bring him in. I mean, that to me is job number one. If they bring in Elam, then that sort of cements the class in the top 10. It also brings in another top 50 guy, which is really important because those guys pan out a much higher percentage than a bunch of guys who are ranked 200 to 300. That's just the way it is. And then you look at what the defensive backfield is going to look like with guys like Trey Dean and Marco Wilson and CJ Henderson. And then you add to that Elam and Steele. And man, I mean, it's like they're going to start playing 6 defensive backs just to get the best guys on the field. And Bernie's going to have to move the linebacker because that's the only way he's going to see the field. And that level of talent on the defensive backfield is only going to help the defensive line, right? So those things are definitely symbiotic. If you can cover guys for 5 seconds, the defensive line has a lot more time to get to the quarterback, and vice versa. If the defensive line can get to the quarterback, the DBs don't have to cover as long. And so, I think for what Grantham wants to do, particularly putting his corners out on an island, having guys like Steele and Elam are important. And certainly that looks like he's leaning towards Florida, but, we'll see. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the defensive front and how it's symbiotic there with the defensive backs. Chris Bogle, fresh off of his visit to Gainesville, where he and DeJuan Black continued their time together as they were together last week in Hawaii for the Polynesian Bowl. The visit went great. Black is on him hard about becoming a Gator. Things look really good for Florida here, but he is supposed to visit Miami this coming up weekend. He's currently committed to Alabama. They won't give up without a fight. We've seen that. We've seen how these kind of recruit. When you recruit against Alabama late and you start getting the inkling and the good feeling that, okay, they might can flip or maybe they're ours over Bama, it always ends up, or not always, but a lot of the time it ends up they stick with Bama or they end up going to Bama. So we'll see how this shakes out. Some good feelings come out of Gainesville this weekend with Bogle. So while there is some good feelings, this one is far from done.
Yeah, I mean, again, an impact guy on the defensive line. He's ranked 71st nationally, a 4-star guy. But again, top 100 guys. That's sort of a theme going through all the guys that Florida can target. In my most recent article, I sort of laid out all the guys who've taken official visits, and there are 10 of them who've taken official visits and haven't signed yet. Some of them have committed. So Bogle, like you mentioned, is committed to Alabama, at least verbally, but he can flip at any point, right? There's nothing binding there. And so 7 of those 10 guys are top 90, and then one of them is 129th nationally. So Mullen has a lot of top end talent that he's going after, and if he can pull in 3 or 4 of those guys, it's going to make a really big difference. So Bogle's one of those guys. I mean, one of the concerns coming out of the early signing day is that they they'd focused at linebacker, they'd focused at defensive back, but that there wasn't a whole lot of depth at defensive line that they had brought in. And so certainly that's a place that they're going to have to focus on and have some guys here who are targets who conceivably they could bring in to help there.
Yeah, another along that defensive front that could help. Charles Moore visited FSU over the weekend. Excuse me if you've heard these lines before. Said the visit went great. He liked the vibe and the culture of the staff and players. Pretty much said the same stuff about FSU as he said about Florida a couple weeks ago when he visited Florida. Florida took the lead in his recruitment then. Then that was until Sal Sunseri left for Alabama. He now claims the Gators, LSU, FSU, Auburn are now on equal footing. He does like the hire of David Turner by Florida, as he knows him from his time in Mississippi when Turner was there before he left to go to Texas A&M. So there is a connection to a new hire that Florida has made. Charles Moore, hard to get a read on, kind of says the same ever since he decommitted from Mississippi State. Besides coming out and naming Florida his leader, has pretty much kind of treaded water, said some things carefully, maybe the same things over and over again when he gets off of his visit. But he's playing this one kind of close to the chest. I still think the Gators should feel good. I think they felt because, look, he was previously committed to Mullen and Grantham at Mississippi State. Decommitted, visited Florida, named Florida his leader after that. I have a hard time believing Sal Sunseri meant that much in that recruiting for Charles Moore. If he has some connection to Turner, like he says, and knows him, I still have to think Florida should feel pretty good about this one as well.
Yeah, you wonder whether he's looking at some of those other defensive line candidates and sort of maybe picking a spot based on that, right? Yeah. So, I mean, you've got Bogle, you've got Pickering, who conceivably could flip, and if both of those guys go to Florida, maybe he doesn't see the same playing time. But again, 69th ranked overall nationally. Those defensive linemen are all sort of in that 69 to 73 range, and a big time guy and a big time get if Florida can bring him in. I mean, defensive line is an area of need, and that's a place they're going to have to focus. As far as, this isn't anything new. I mean, we ran into the same thing with Nesta Silvera and Andrew Chatfield last year, where you really didn't know where they were, and there was a whole lot of sort of back and forth heading into signing day, and a lot of guys like doing that, and it adds to the entertainment on National Signing Day, that's for sure. And since early signing day is taking a lot of the drama out, this is really the only drama we have left for this sort of thing. So, hey, he's going to go where he thinks he's got the best chance to play and where he's got the best chance to develop in the NFL. I think you and I happen to think that's probably Florida at this point. Certainly not Miami and certainly not Florida State, but that's a decision he's going to have to make. But since Florida State and Miami are involved in this recruitment, again, this is not, you talked about it being a statement recruitment of Elam between Florida and Georgia. It's sort of the same thing here, right? That if you can bring in somebody like Moore over Florida State and over Miami, well, now all of a sudden you're establishing something in the state that becomes pretty special. And this is a unique opportunity for Mullen in that, you've got all the transition going on at Miami, and you've got sort of the disarray going on up in Tallahassee. And if he can take advantage of that.
Dance.
Hey man, they're busy doing stuff for Martin Luther King Day or something. So, so anyway, obviously a big time guy, big time recruit that they need to bring in, and because of who they're recruiting against, I think it makes a big deal. So it's good that he's got a relationship with Turner. Again, you don't hire a guy because of his relationships for one recruit, but certainly if you've got a guy who has relationships with a recruit who can fill your need, it makes sense to bring him in. And so we'll see whether Turner can close the deal.
And one more of the top targets here. The Gators are going after Mark Anthony Richards, coming off of a visit to Miami. Interesting note here, Will, is the visit was made without his parents. So that's not a good sign for Miami. Yes, his parents have visited Miami before, but this is a new staff. They didn't make the trip. So maybe I'm making too big of a deal about it, but I don't, I think that means something for Miami and not in a good way there. This is still a Florida, Miami, Auburn, and now Georgia battle, as they really sold him last week on their running back heritage and him playing running back there. Florida sold him more on that Kadarius Toney role where he can go out wide. You can be in the backfield. You can be a type of playmaker. So maybe it may come down to kind of just where he envisions himself. Does he want to play more of a pure running back? I don't think Florida's really, especially with who Florida can target in 2020. I don't necessarily think Florida's just going to say they can come in here. And, I mean, look, if that's what it takes to get him, however you want to do it and recruit him and get him in the fold, okay. But I think it's come out enough that we know Florida is selling him more on a playmaker role instead of just the running back role Georgia's given or is planning on giving to him if he came to Georgia.
Yeah, well, it does sort of indicate the way Mullen recruits because, like you said, he could say, hey, you'll come in, you'll play running back, stuff like that. But the reality is he's going to be behind Pierce. He's going to be behind Clement. He's going to be behind Naquan Wright. He's going to be behind Malik Davis. And so to break into that is probably going to be quite a challenge. Whereas if he comes in at wide receiver, Kadarius Toney's coming into his junior year, Tyree Cleveland's coming into his senior year, Van Jefferson, Freddie Swain, Josh Hammond, all those guys are really sort of towards the tail end of their careers at Florida. And so there's going to be some opportunity there. And that's how you're going to have to sell somebody like Richards because he's going to get playing time if he comes in as a wide receiver, as a flanker, or in that Toney role, whereas he might not get that playing time at running back. Now, obviously, if it turns out that Richards is as special as some of the guys that Mullen's had in the backfield before, he'll find a way to get him the ball in the backfield. But he's going to have to prove it, obviously, if he wants to do that. And I mean, he's going to have to do the same thing at Georgia. It's not as if Georgia doesn't have a bunch of studs back there in the backfield as well. So if I don't necessarily know that he cracks the backfield at Georgia as well, based on what they've got there and what they've got coming back. So it'll be interesting to see whether he believes the sales job from Georgia or whether he believes the sales job from Florida. Certainly, we've seen some guys leave Georgia recently who maybe didn't feel like the sales job matched reality once they got to Athens, and this may be another case like that. But I think from everything that you can tell from the film and looking at him, he can excel in that flanker sort of Kadarius Toney role. I think running in between the tackles, he could probably do that too. But I think out at wide receiver is probably where his future is. And so it'll be interesting to see whether he's got the NFL in mind when he makes this choice.
That is true. And these are the main four left, Will, as we head into signing day, that the Gators, to me, have the best chance of signing. So can you pull in Elam away from Georgia? Can you make a late splash for Bogle and flip him from Alabama? Can you fend off other schools and get a player you really need in Charles Moore? Can you sell Mark Anthony Richards on becoming a big playmaker in this offense over some of your biggest rivals out there? Can the Gators go 4 for 4 and bringing in these guys? And if they do, Will, feeds right into your latest article on readreaction.com. These 4 players would be 4 of the top 6 players Florida would sign if they brought these guys in. It's a class ranked 11th right now. Not bad heading in to February signing day. But you bring these 4 in, and I'll say it again. These guys would be 4 of your top 6 players if you're able to bring them in. It would bolt the Gators up in the recruiting rankings.
Yeah, it'd be a heck of a finish. To bring in 4 top 100 guys on National Signing Day after really it means he's hit on all of his targets after early signing day, which would be really, really impressive. You look right now, it depends on how you break it down. So if you look at the second year, recruiting for all the different coaches from Florida going back to Zook, Zook had 14 blue chips, Meyer had 18, Muschamp had 16, McElwain had 9, and then Mullen's at 15 right now. So if you add 4 guys who are top 100, now he's at 19 blue chips, which is more than Urban Meyer had coming in his second year. If you look at top 100 guys, that takes him up to 6, which, Zook had 12, Meyer had 9, Muschamp had 6, McElwain had 4, and then Mullen's got 2 right now with Tyron Hopper and then Steele. And so, all of a sudden now you're looking at, if you add 4 guys to that, now you're looking at 15 total top 300 players, which compares very favorably to Zook. So Zook had 15, Meyer had 18, Muschamp had 11, and McElwain had 7. And so, McElwain, really struggled on the recruiting trail. That's something that we've talked about quite a bit. Mullen, for all the criticism that I've leveled at him, is very clearly outperforming McElwain. The question is, can he get into that Zuckmeyer Muschamp range? And it doesn't guarantee winning, obviously, because Muschamp didn't win and Zook didn't win, at least not at the level that Florida fans expect. But I do think it's a prerequisite for winning, and people certainly give Zook an awful lot of credit for stocking the cabinet for Meyer when he came in, and Meyer sort of taking those guys and turning them into a championship team. And so if we start looking at that, I mean, really Meyer is the gold standard for recruiting when it comes to Florida, at least since the recruiting services have been in effect. And Mullen is getting close if he can pull in those 4 guys. I mean, those 4 guys take the 24/7 score to 287.5, which over from 2014 to 2018 would have been an average national ranking of 5th. Now that still puts them 4th in the SEC.
That is ridiculous. I mean, that is insane. And
it really
is. And if I'm not mistaken, FSU is the 2nd ranked ACC team, and they're like at 16th or 17th.
Well, and this is something that's consistent. So there was an article I had earlier this year that sort of asked if top 10 was good enough, and it looked at conferences, and basically winning percentage tailed off for the top team in the conference had a much higher winning percentage than the 2nd and the 3rd team. And then the 2nd and the 3rd team had a much higher winning percentage than the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th teams when it came to recruiting in each conference. So in the ACC, Florida State was traditionally 1st, Clemson was 2nd. In the Big Ten, it was Ohio State 1st, Michigan 2nd, and then he sort of had that next tier. And so being in that top 3, I know Bill said it quite a bit, is being in that top 3 is important just from the standpoint of being able to compete within your own conference. And yeah, it's insane that you'd be 4th and 5th nationally. But again, if we go back and look at historically what's happened, the average increase from coaches from year 1 to year 2, when you look at Zuckmeyer, Muschamp, McElwain, and Mullen, or I'm sorry, Zuckmeyer, Muschamp, and McElwain, the average increase has been about 7 spots. So Mullen finished 14th last year. So I think a reasonable expectation based on history is he should be around 7th. And if he pulls in Elam, Moore, and Richards, or if you switch out, I mean, really, Elam, Moore, Richards, and Bogle, if he pulls in 3 of those 4, he probably hits that. So that would put him at 282.4 if he had Elam, Moore, and Richards, and that would put him at 7th historically. And then if he just has Elam and Moore, then he's probably 8th. If he just gets Elam, he's 9th. And then if he doesn't get anybody, he stays right around 11th. Now, there are a couple of teams behind him. So Ohio State, and there's one more, it's escaping me right now. But there's a couple of teams right behind him that only have 15 or 16 commits. And so if those teams have big finishes, then they could sort of blow past a bunch of different teams as well, just because of where they're at. But when you look at average national recruiting ranking, I mean, if they hit all 4, that puts them up at 91.5. That's a major talent upgrade for Florida. It's not Alabama, it's not Georgia, but it is getting into that Texas A&M, LSU, Auburn range. And so really positions Florida very well for the future, particularly with the way the 2020 and 2021 classes have started, just having a much quicker start for those classes than they've had this year. And so if he can get that big finish this year, really sets him up to have a successful 2020 season, and then be able to not necessarily have to race to the finish line, but basically have his class set high level top 5 class by the time early signing day comes around.
Yeah, and you get to that point, maybe you're picking and choosing who you want to finish with, kind of like Alabama's used to doing and Georgia's doing the last couple of years. And hey, look, you get this talent influx that we're talking about, and combo with Mullen's coaching that we've seen, and I think we can feel pretty good about the future of Gator football. Talk about the future before we sign off here, Will. Junior Day coming up this weekend, and headlined by some big targets here. Quarterback from Jacksonville, right down the road from me, Carson Beck, plays at Mandarin. Will, he plays like 5 minutes from my house. So there's a lot of talk if he flips from Alabama, that Florida or Miami would be some destinations there. So if he flips to Florida, you could probably, if Mandarin's having a home game, you'll probably see me there a whole good bit. Running back from Lakeland, DeMarcus Bowman, big time target that the Gators are going after. Recently coming off a visit to Clemson in their junior day this past weekend there. So we'll visit Florida this coming up weekend. Cornerback Finley Graham as well. And also commits cornerback Anthony Richardson, running back Kayvon Lee, wide receiver Leonard Manuel, wide receiver Jaquavion Frazier's, Defensive end, Josh Griffiths. Defensive tackle, Gervon Dexter. And safety, Rashad Torrance. All those commits are going to be here with all these uncommitted top targets, top prospects for the Gators. And we'll see. We don't have to get too in-depth about these guys. We got almost a year to preview these guys and what they'll bring to the table. But with the fast start that you're getting in 2020, you're bringing in some big-time targets here for this junior day. And maybe Mullen and the current commits coaching staff can make a big impression on these guys.
Yeah, I think the important thing maybe to take note there is the areas that you specified. So the quarterback is from Jacksonville. DeMarcus Bowman is from Lakeland. And so, you always talk about, and I think even Mullen's talked about, drawing a circle around Gainesville and making sure that they own those areas. Well, this is the opportunity to do that, right? Junior Day allows you to bring in guys who are local, allows you to establish those relationships, allows you to make sure you lock down the areas that you have to lock down in order to be successful. I mean, it's great that Chris Steele's coming from California, but you shouldn't have to go out to California to get top 100 guys, because they're sitting there in Lakeland, and they're sitting there in Jacksonville, and they're sitting there in Lake City, and in Tampa, and even in Miami if you want to go down to South Florida. So they're in the state, and those guys need to go to Florida at an extremely high clip for Florida to be excellent. Long term, the program is going to have to be built on state talent, on in-state talent. It's always been built on in-state talent, and so I think that's maybe the thing to look at as you look at that list and where are these guys from. And it really sort of makes me happy that the guys you're saying are the big time targets are coming from areas where that circle would really sit, and where Florida needs to dominate and make sure that guys like Kirby Smart and Nick Saban and to a lesser extent Jimbo Fisher can't come in and poach those guys, because that's what's happened over the last couple of years. Is that other schools, Clemson and Ohio State, have come into Florida and raided it. So like a guy like Trevon Grimes, who obviously transferred to Florida but decided to go to Ohio State straight out of school. That just can't happen. And so
I've seen it up close too. These Trinity Christian kids right here in Jacksonville. Ohio State is the school in right here in Jacksonville, Ohio State. That is time for it to change, Will.
Yeah, well, and that's part of what Mullen's mission is, right? Is to make sure that those in-state guys decide that Florida is their dream school, not Ohio State, not Michigan, not Clemson, not Alabama, and that's not a one-year operation. That's a multi-year operation. And so, again, we started off this entire podcast talking about continuity, and I think Mullen really sort of exudes the idea that he's going to be at Florida for a long time. I don't think anybody's worried that he's necessarily looking to move to the NFL. And so, people can be pretty confident based on his first year, based on what he's accomplished in his career, that he's going to be at Florida as long as Florida will have him. And that he's going to be there for a while. And so I do think that plays a role. Like, if I were deciding where to go for college and I was deciding who I wanted to play for, the idea that I'm playing for a guy who just went 10-3, that has the relationship that he has with Strickland, that has shown the kind of improvement that he's shown both at Mississippi State and Florida, I look at that and say, hey, I'm going to get to play for that guy for 4 years. And so if I don't make it, it's my fault. Like, it's not a matter of 9 different coaching changes and all sorts of different things. It's my fault if I don't make it. And so,
and you're playing the SEC, where you're playing big time opponents. Those guys are coming in. You're on national. I mean, look, you're on national TV no matter where. But who are you tuning into? Where's the you're going to be tuned into when you play Alabama, when you play Georgia, when you play LSU, when you play Texas A&M, when you play Tennessee, Florida State and Miami. What, 2 big games a year, if that? Look, so that plays into it as well.
Well, come on, man. I mean, Boston College is a tough opponent. We need to make sure that we give the Ramblin' Wreck at Georgia Tech full credit.
FSU did beat Boston College. Got them all excited, got them all excited that we're going to beat Florida the next week.
Hey, we hold on to little bits of hope when it's just slipping away. So we'll hope that continues to slip away for the Seminoles all next year. But I don't know. We kind of need Willie to be just good enough to where they don't can him after year 2. Like, they can't be that terrible, because then they really, any of these programs, you get the right coach in there, and all of a sudden things take off. I think we're kind of seeing that right now with Florida. The big question at Florida has always been Mullen's recruiting prowess. And so that, I think, is where junior day becomes important. That's where I think, can he close with these 4 guys we talked about for signing day? That becomes important because I don't think anybody has any questions about his ability to improve things on the field. I mean, we just watched it, right? We just watched him take the same team and make them loads better from one year to the next. And so
there you go. There's another selling point too. I mean, I know you harped on that big time. Well, that's a good point, and I don't think we talked enough about it. And maybe if Carson Beck ends up flipping from Alabama to Florida, this could be a reason why. But I remember you saying in the preseason, or actually it was right after Mullen was hired, and we were talking about some of the good things that he could do and maybe some of the good things he could do on the recruiting trail. And it was, let's see if I can take Felipe Franks, this guy that Jim McElwain and Doug Nussmeier couldn't do anything with. And now Felipe Franks is going to be a returning starter in the SEC, one who ended the season with some pretty good numbers, and one where there's not really a question now if he's going to be the starter at Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a confluence of events. I mean, certainly the performance on the field makes a difference. The issues that are going on at Florida State and Miami make a difference. The fact that not everybody can go to Georgia and Alabama certainly makes a difference. And then and then obviously I don't think that Mullen is necessarily a slouch on the trail either. I mean, I think, probably didn't get as big of a start as he wanted, but I think we can also look back and say, well, maybe he was concentrating on making sure that the team was more confident over the course of the season and really focusing on the performance on the field than maybe he was in the recruiting at the beginning stages, because it certainly has picked up quite a bit over the last 6 months. And so, that hasn't historically happened. I don't think you want to rely on outliers, but they can certainly happen. And so if Mullen closes and they end up with a top 5 class, hey, tip your hat to him. I mean, that's an outstanding job done, because that's not something guys typically do. You don't typically come roaring up from 30th or 32nd or whatever they were when the season started to 5th. I mean, usually at a program like Florida, you go from 30th when the season starts, and the guys who sort of commit bring you up to 12th or 13th. That's what's happened under McElwain. And so if he can really close it and he can get to 5th, you tip your cap to him, say that's a heck of a job. And and the good news is you get a pat on the back, and one day later we'll be asking about 2020 and 2021. So, because that's the way college football is, right? I mean, it's recruit or die, and it doesn't end just because you have a good class this year or don't have a good class this year. I mean, he's going to be here for the long term, and so that's going to be a consistent thing. Is that we're going to be looking at that constantly, and certainly all signs point towards the positive side. And on the field, he's been nothing short of great. And so, again, you mentioned it, and Frank's development becomes a really big selling point, especially if Frank shows the kind of improvement that Matthew Stafford showed from year 2 to year 3. And all of a sudden now Mullen has taken Felipe Franks from where he was 2 years ago to being essentially a first-round pick in the NFL draft. I mean, that's something where you're like, all right. Like if I've got some tools and I go to Florida, I'm going to be able to get that sort of thing. So it starts to sell itself at that point. And that was always sort of the point of some of the discussions we had over the summer, is that, success on the field historically has not led to success on the recruiting trail that specific year. Turns out he's actually turning it into success this year as well. But, that 2020 and 2021 class, it's not a coincidence those things have started quickly. I mean, the reason they've started quickly is people have looked at the program and said, this one's heading up and we want to be a part of it. And, people love jumping on. So I'm excited to see where this goes, and really excited to see how we can finish for this signing day. But it's not the end. I mean, I think sort of where he was in August last year versus where he's going to be in August next year, when we look at these recruiting classes, is really going to be night and day. And it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, it's pretty much the perfect storm of things that had to happen for this big finish, and they're reaping the rewards. We've mentioned the bad seasons by FSU and Miami, coaching turnover at Georgia, coaching turnover at Alabama. They may end up reaping the rewards here for a big time finish for the 2019 class, and keep it going in 2020 and 2021. We'll that about do it for this episode. I know you just released your latest article on Read and Reaction. You guys can go check it out, where Will has talked a little about it here, just really diving into the 2019 class and the finish those guys could have in the next week and a half. Will, what you got coming on the horizon there?
Oh man, at some point we're gonna be diving into some of the film of some of the guys who maybe are coming in. So Jalen Jones, I'm interested in taking a look at some of the stuff that he's done, that he's put on film. I know people were interested in Emory Jones last year. I think Jalen Jones is probably gonna be some interest there too, and really sort of. I'm thinking about doing some stuff with some video, so hopefully that'll be coming out in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll see whether people like that as well. Just sort of trying to explain maybe some of the concepts that we talk on here. I mean, we talked about two gap and one gap schemes and things like that, and it's not always entirely clear what those are, and so at least not to everyone. And so trying to explain those sorts of things and maybe show people that is something that I'm working on doing. So we'll see. It might take me longer than a couple of weeks to get that up and running, but I'm hopeful that that the job slows down a little bit and we're able to do that.
Tomorrow.
I have to like spend time with my kids this week, Dave. So so we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, it's my daughter will be turning 5 on Friday, so I understand. So to Orlando we go this coming up weekend. So
oh man,
it'll
so
be a fun time.
Did you get her tickets to the Princess Castle? Is she having dinner with the princesses?
No, we did that a little after her birthday last year. She did the whole Disney princess thing. So some American Doll thing coming up this weekend. So
okay. So,
yeah.
Well, this is good. I look forward to seeing the pictures that you post on Twitter.
Yeah, we'll be stuff. I'm sure.
Can we put video of you like combing the American Doll's hair or something? That'd be great.
I'm sure my wife will take plenty of pictures and post them out there. So if not, I usually do a pretty good job of embarrassing myself. So I'm sure I'll put them out there too.
Hey man, we enjoy seeing it. There's nothing better than humor in a 5-year-old girl, that's for sure. So enjoy it. It doesn't last. Mine's 10, and it feels like she's 13 or 14 or 15 sometimes. So enjoy it while she's 5,
man. It can slow down for sure. All right, well, good to have you back this week. And everybody, you can check Will out at readandreaction.com, his site there, and on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.